We are so grateful for all our speakers, but yes, please get on your hands. Preeta, come on.
Can't stop, addicted to the shindig. Chop, chop, it says I'm gonna win big. Choose not to life of imitation.
Thank you, Marnie. Thank God you didn't get on your hands. So I want to step back just a little bit from the business world and talk more generally about this movement toward purpose and what's inspiring me and what I'm seeing as a global movement to reclaim purpose and personal empowerment in so many sectors of our life. And I'm just so grateful for Jay and Graham and so many others that are bringing that movement here to the middle of everywhere, to the business world. So what inspires me about all this is the ethos of kindness, service, gratitude, community, and even love. I mean, that's not a word you hear very often in the public square, much less in the workplace. But when you ask people how they want to show up in life and how they want to show up in most of their spheres, those are the words that come to mind. And so this whole movement towards purpose is about integrating us and integrating all the parts of ourselves to be more in alignment with ourselves, with others, and with nature. So as Marty said, I've spent a chunk of time in the business world, and so I want to just put that to the side, as I said. I lived in London, ran as global general counsel for a big bank. I was partner at one of the world's largest law firms. I'm now on the board of Nelnet here in Nebraska. And I work with a bunch of technology companies in my work at MIT. So I could talk to you, as I was asked to talk about the somewhat historical anomaly of shareholder primacy, or the idea of the corporation as a person, and how those kind of became part of our jurisprudence. I could talk about that. Or we could talk about the origins of the corporation and the financial system, and just understand kind of what a critical inflection point we're at in all those places. But I don't really want to talk about that now, and maybe we'll talk about that in the panel this afternoon with the other folks that are focused on transforming capitalism. What I want to talk to you about is what I have personally, like my own journey and what I've learned in my 30-year career in private sector and public sector, and in senior and really large institutions like big government, big corporations. And there's really just two things that I want to kind of preview for you. One is that I think that communities in the American heartland, like Lincoln, are going to be ground zero for what I think is kind of the movement toward purpose. And there's a reason for that, and that's because of the scale at which organizations here operate and the connectedness we have to one another and to the community. So, and I'll come back to that in a minute, but I really think, and that's part of the reason I moved back to Nebraska after 35 years on the East Coast, is I think the real action of connecting people to purpose and igniting the spirit of generosity, community, and all of those values is going to start right here. And the second thing I want to talk that I've learned over the course of my career is that all of our skills, all of the tools, all of the amazing technologies, all of the platforms we have, all the positions, all of our talents, all of our assets, all of that they're really just tools for us to uncover our own blockages to connect to higher purpose and to love, and to spread and ignite that journey of uncovering in others. But I want to start first with a story, and that's the story of Christo Brand. Christo Brand is a South African who became a prison guard at the age of 18. And this was 1978. When he started working at the prison, he was told that he would be responsible for a particular prisoner. Prisoner 4664 was his number, who was described as one of the most angry of all the terrorists in South Africa. But prisoner 46664, who was then age 60, surprised Christo. He was just an 18-year-old prison guard at the time. The prisoner surprised him by asking him about his family, his upbringing, his life on the farm, and his fears for the future. That prisoner was Nelson Mandela. And over many years, Mandela successfully urged and helped Christo, his jailer, to get an education. Christo said later that there was no barrier between us. Like me, Mandela came from a farm. He was a human being. We understood and shared the same sky and the same air. So Mandela was described when he went into prison as one of the angriest of the prisoners. But he ended up spending 27 years in prison, and the suffering of those 27 years helped to purify him and to grow in magnanimity and love, and those ultimately would become his hallmark. And so by the time that young Christo came to be his guard, Mandela had already been in prison for a number of years, and he already had connected to his purpose for why he was in prison, which was to uncover his own capacity for love. So during his time in prison, Mandela shifted, where he was looking. He had been looking for like the keys to this revolution in the outer world through all of the kind of traditional tools of law, position, power, whatever. And he started realizing that the keys to the beloved community lay in his own heart. So when he connected to his own love, he started connecting with those around him. So when Mandela was inaugurated the leader of a free South Africa, he invited Christo, his young jailer, to the inauguration. And even today, that jailer still says that he finds wondrous how Mandela was able to transform their relationship. Incredibly, he said, he was my prisoner, but he was my father. So just think about that, like the power of unlocking that energy, that spirit within each of us. So this is Bob Chapman. Moving to the business world a little bit. Bob Chapman is the CEO of a company called Barry Waymiller Enterprises, which is a privately held company in St. Louis, Missouri. And he's someone I've had the pleasure of getting to know and work with pretty closely over the last couple of years. So Barry Waymiller started in 1885 as a very traditional Midwestern manufacturing company. It created bottle washers for the beer industry. It was St. Louis after all. And now it's transformed over the course of the last 100-some years to be a global supplier of manufacturing technology in a huge array of businesses: paper products, packaging, sheeting, corrugating, and even IT engineering services. So since 1987, Barry Waymiller's acquired 80 businesses. It has now 10 separate operating companies, employs 15,000 people, with the vast majority being in the United States, and it has $2.8 billion in revenues. So the reason I talk about Bob and Barry Waymiller is what's remarkable about him is not all of those statistics, although those are pretty amazing. What's amazing is that about 15 years ago, in his late 50s, which goes to show you it's never too late to discover purpose, Bob experienced 3 epiphanies. So the first epiphany happened when he was on the manufacturing floor of one of his companies. And it was like a break. And all these employees from the shop floor, came into the break room. And they were alive and happy. They were talking about, it was March Madness week. They were playing hoops. They were talking about their favorite teams. They were having a good time, and they were just really energized. And so he kind of joined in. He was excited about meeting these employees. And then the bell rang, and they went back out onto the floor. And he saw all the life and the energy drain out of them. And so Bob was watching this going, oh my God, look at the difference between who these people are and what they are when they're at work. So his first epiphany led him to ask himself in his mind, why can't business be fun? And Jay touched on this a little bit. This idea of, why can't people bring all of that energy and excitement that they have in the break room onto the shop floor? His second epiphany happened when he was sitting in the pews of his church. He was listening to a sermon by his preacher, and he was just really inspired. It really moved him greatly. And he thought, wow, this is incredible. It's amazing that 1 hour on a Sunday can have such a dramatic effect on me. And all of a sudden he started thinking, we as stewards of this massive organization touch people's lives not just 1 hour a week, but 40 hours a week. And he started thinking, why can't we think of our 40 hours as opportunities to help people become who they were intended to be? So that led to kind of a second realization, which is that as leaders of organizations, we have 40 hours a week to inspire. And his third epiphany came when he was at a family wedding, a friend's wedding, a family member's wedding, and he was watching the parents walk the bride down the aisle. And he was really taken by, the giving away of the bride and the kind of, do you trust, you're entrusting your daughter's life or your son's life to this other person and the partnership that they're going to create. And this other person is going to take care of their precious child that they're giving away. And he thought, we have somebody's precious child for 40 hours a week. Yet certainly we don't have them for all their lives, and their partners are important. But for 40 hours a week, we're stewards of someone's precious child. And he started thinking, these people in my care are not a function. They're my responsibility while they're in my care. And so this led to his third epiphany, which is that everyone is someone's precious child. So all of these three epiphanies led to a dramatic realization and a dramatic restructuring of his business. What he started realizing was that his job was not to steward all these 10 different business lines he had, or to lead a corporate revolution, on the financial front or customer front, and to inspire employees to serve as foot soldiers in that quest. What he started realizing instead, he flipped the script, and what he realized was that his job was to serve employees, and that acquiring all these businesses and acquiring all these customers was the means for him to take care of his employees. I mean, it's a pretty dramatic flipping of the script. It's like suddenly we're not here necessarily to serve customers. I mean, we care about our customers, but we're acquiring customers because we are here to care for the people that are in our direct line of care. So your business, he found out, was the means, not the end, for caring for the people around you and those you employ. So he ended up doing a lot of really dramatic things. He created an internal training thing called Barry Wehmiller University, which now trains so many massive corporations around the world, including American Airlines. They offer classes in leadership, listening, and amazingly, his communications course is so profound and powerful. He teaches people not how to speak, but how to listen. And what started happening was they offered this not just to the leadership, but to every single person. They made it mandatory from the shop floor on up in every single one of their facilities. And what they started finding was that marriages started shifting. All of a sudden, spouses started saying, I want to take that course. And then they started measuring their success in part by how many marriages were improving. So it's kind of an amazing sense of transforming the function of business. So for me, what this has all kind of led to, and what I want to touch on a little bit, is that we shouldn't think about purpose necessarily just in the context of business or personal purpose. We need to think about purpose in the context of our lives, and then consider business and other tools as a tool that can amplify and serve that purpose. Otherwise, we continue the kind of means and a problem that I think has brought our society to a certain critical inflection point, and I'll touch a little bit more on that. So we may think that our tools and skills and relationships are in service of some grand systemic impact or some attempt to do more good and to what we want to achieve. But in a world of complexity and lots of interlocking causes and effects, I think that it's all these grand platforms and grand plans of doing good in the world that end up being the means for us to connect more deeply to ourselves, to others, and to others in the natural world. And as we transform and get connected to our purpose, the world around us naturally begins to transform. So Jay talked a little bit about this, he talked a lot about this, where he says, don't try and do impact. Start with discovering your purpose. And it's something that I feel very deeply about. It's that aim for purpose, not impact. That impact will inevitably follow. Sometimes these mantras of do more good, it leads to a lot of pressure, and we hear about this all the time, like the BHAGs, the big, hairy, audacious goals. You shouldn't be taking on something unless you're going to touch the lives of 1 billion people. Certainly I was in enterprises that thought that way. But one of the things I really like about Nebraska businesses and why I came back here is that I think that the human and community scale at which they operate allow people in these institutions to really do good while also doing that at a scale that doesn't cause a lot of unintended harm. So after a career in lots of large institutions and with huge multinational impact, I've come to believe that a lot of the energy that fuels those kinds of institutions is analogous to what I call fossil fuel energy. It's extractive energy, it's impersonal, and it's finite. The energy that fuels purpose is clean energy. It's renewable, regenerative, and it's an energy of love. So start with purpose. More about Barry Wehmiller. So I think this need to connect to purpose is especially important in this particular era that we find ourselves. We're now in an age of incredible, exponential, disruptive change. An individual can now produce what it took corporations and governments to do in previous centuries. A single person can create out of their garage massive good or massive harm. We have access to powerful technologies by which we can, redesign our children, remake our very DNA, or change our lifespans. And while disruptive change applies to every single era of society, we're at a really unique and pivotal inflection point. So, as you can see from this time graph of technological and cultural change, I don't know how clearly you can see that, but it took 450 years to go from invention of the printing press, which is on the far left, to the telephone in 1876, which is, somewhere about 2/3 of the way on the graph, that's 18 generations. But it's taken only one generation, far less than one lifetime, to go from invention of the personal computer to the massive disruption of core industries and ways of organizing ourselves and our nations that we've experienced in just the last 30 years. So in this age of do-it-yourself innovation, we've seen large industries disrupted seemingly overnight, including the entire music recording industry by iTunes, bookstores and so many of our retailers by Amazon, and more recently our transportation, manufacturing, and travel industries. And now we're starting to see our civic information via journalism, our monetary systems, our elections, and our very democracy and political structures upended by technology and social media. And we're on the cusp of so much more. So I've done a lot of work these last few years, my work at MIT and Silicon Valley and at Harvard and elsewhere. I've gained a pretty bird's eye view of the dizzying pace of what's coming. The world is spinning faster than we can make meaning of it. We no longer have a norm where companies provide steady employment and solid benefits as a kind of implicit social contract over a lifetime for a job well done. We instead have the gig economy, time shifting, work sharing, and many jobs with few, if any, benefits or contracts. And forget anything resembling the kinds of things we heard about this morning, which is actually investing in the self-actualization and self-realization of employees. Today, only 8 individuals control as much wealth as half of the world's population. So just imagine that. 8 people having the same amount of wealth as 3.7 billion. So we no longer have just a few sources of trusted and respected news and information to make sense of all of this massive disruption for us. We don't have Walter Cronkite telling us anymore that that's the way it is every evening. We instead have information overload, alternate realities, filter bubbles, social cocoons, trolls, and fake news. And so as so many fall behind, we ache to go back to a prior era and to try to make things feel great again, to a time when we felt somewhat in the driver's seat. But the truth is that that era is never coming back. We're entering the era of the driverless car, where no one and everyone is in charge. So to be able to tap into a transcendent sense of purpose and to help others to do that in this kind of dizzying world has never been more important, as our old stories and our old structures for finding meaning collapse all around us, and as we enter into what I like to call the space between civilizational stories. So while machines can help us do certain things better, they can never do what makes us quintessentially human. That can't be outsourced. And so we need to create the kind of structures that make self-actualization and human awakening front and center. So for that, I want to suggest that maybe we need to look at Silicon Valley's other revolution. There is, after all, another revolution going on beyond technology, and it involves the revival of ancient tools of mindfulness that help us uncover purpose, awaken to higher purpose, and gain consciousness over our actions. And a lot of this has been validated by modern neuroscience. So from the founders of Google and Apple to scores of more traditional Fortune 500 companies like Goldman Sachs, to prisoners and at-risk youth, mindfulness practices are helping employees unlock purpose. You know, it's interesting because we think so much about inspiration and leadership, but one thing that what I found interesting is inspire. The word inspire actually means to breathe life into. And as we breathe life into ourselves, we naturally help others find that life within them as well, to experience that breath of life. The whole concept of breath is something that I find fascinating. I mean, whether you come from a Western tradition, like in the Bible in Genesis, soon after God created man, he breathed into the nostril of man the breath of life. Or whether you come from an Eastern tradition, connecting to breath is kind of, in some ways, whether through yoga or meditation, it's the essence of connecting to inspiration, to purpose, to soul, to divine. And that's what people are finding all over the world. So Google, in fact, has made the promotion of mindfulness one of its corporate missions. It's turned the mantra of Google search into search inside yourself. And modern neurology and brain science confirm that mindfulness is critical for attention training, self-knowledge, self-awareness, empathy, and social skills. So in my own experience, I found it to be an important tool for eliminating blockages to love and to connecting with my own sense of purpose. And if you have any interest in experiencing this, we'll do a little workshop on it tomorrow morning. It's at a god-awful hour, I think 7 a.m. So if any of you feel like coming, feel free. I'll try and be there as well. It's funny because I have to tell you the story. When I first, I first got into this when I left the White House in 2012. And I did my first 10-day mindfulness retreat, which seemed crazy at the time to me. I was like, why would anyone do this? I hadn't done it for 10 seconds, much less 10 days. And I had this really amazing experience with it. And then I moved to London, as I've said, to work for this large bank. And it was interesting. One of my first weeks in London, I was at this dinner party. And someone came up to me, or someone started talking about this thing that I had just gone through, and my ears kind of pricked up. And he turned to me, and I could tell he was kind of an important guy, because everybody seemed to be, fawning on him, but I was new to London, I didn't really know people. And he's made some comment, he said, do you do this? And I said, well, I'm just learning this. I can't really say I do it, but I do it. I'm just learning this. And I said, do you? And he said, yes, he was an assistant teacher in Europe. And I knew enough, I was just brand new, but I knew enough to know that an assistant teacher in Europe means that he sits in silence for 60 days a year. And I kind of just thought, oh my gosh, and he was a youngish guy, like in his 40s, and I said, can I ask what you do that you're able to disconnect from the world for 60 days a year? I mean, you have to totally disconnect, no phone, nothing, no books, no reading, nothing. And I thought, this guy have a serious job that he can do this? And he said he was the CEO of Apple in Europe. And my jaws kind of dropped, and I was like, how can you possibly run a major company like that and do this for 60 days a year? And he turned to me and he was like, I can see you're new to this, because soon the question will be, how can you afford not to? And he said that all of the innovations they've had Steve Jobs had kind of gotten them in this, but so many of their innovations came from these periods of deep going within. And I talk about this because I think that finding purpose and discovering that purpose is often that kind of deep journey to uncover what's buried and latent and what's already there within you, which is a deep sense of love and connection. So I want to close with these images of renowned sculptures from possibly the greatest master of Western civilization, Michelangelo. When we see these stunning masterpieces, or at least when I see them, I've always been struck by the incredible genius and the sheer beauty of the creation. The really flowing, supple forms that are kind of in marble, in stone. How can he make them come so alive? And standing in front of them, it's impossible not to enter into relationship with what is just a stone figure. But the beauty of these sculptures, I think, masks, in some ways, the greater beauty of Michelangelo's genius. And it's his unfinished work, his unfinished statues, that reveals his approach and his concept to carving. Michelangelo believed that the sculptor was not creating figures from stone, but is simply revealing the powerful figures already contained in the marble. The sculptor's task, he explained, is to chip away the excess, to reveal, and to free the figures encased in the stone. And that, I want to suggest, is our task as people and as leaders, not managers, but leaders, leaders that are meant to breathe life into others. It's to free the beauty, the knowledge, and the wisdom that's inherent in each of us and in each person in our care. Finding purpose is not necessarily an additive process. As Michelangelo showed us, it's the power of uncovering, unveiling, revealing the deeper knowing within each of us. Only when we see what's hidden deep in our stone can we breathe life into it. And the beauty of our creation and the good in the world will manifest and naturally emerge from that. So in this era of massive change, and what I think is a really critical and historical inflection point, we have the opportunity to co-create reality and reestablish the right relationship between means and ends, tools and purpose. And as long as we seek impact in the world that's disconnected from purpose, as long as we're going after those BHAGs without being connected to what's motivating us and what's driving us and what we're meant to do in the world, I think we will, like Nelson Mandela, remain in prison, but prisons of our own making. Instead, when we chip away at our excesses and really uncover what's true, essential, and beautiful, we'll allow ourselves the space to breathe in life and to be inspired by others, and to inspire others. So I want to encourage all of you to think about purpose, not just in the context of business, but to really think about it in a very personal way. And when you do that, all of your tools, whether at business, whether at work, whether your skills, they will naturally align to let you manifest that purpose in the world. So thanks so much.
Feeling that you stay from in time.